The fluorescent lights in the medical bay flickered with that familiar hum that had become the soundtrack to Staff Sergeant Maya Chen's nights at Forward Operating Base Blackwater. At 0347 hours, the silence was deceptive, false calm that preceded the storm of wounded soldiers who would inevitably flood through those double doors. She methodically checked her supplies for the third time that night, her calloused fingers moving with practiced precision across bandages, sutures, and morphine vials. Each item had its place, just as she had found hers in this concrete tomb buried in the Afghan desert. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya's reflection caught in the stainless steel cabinet door, angular features softened by exhaustion, dark hair pulled back in regulation style, brown eyes that had seen too much but still held an ember of determination. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her sleeve through blood, sweat, and an unwavering commitment to keeping others alive. The medic's cross on her uniform seemed to glow under the harsh lighting, a symbol that had become both her identity and her shield. Another quiet night, Chen? Corporal Jake Martinez emerged from the supply room, his boyish grin a welcome interruption to the sterile atmosphere. At 22, Jake still possessed the kind of optimism that the desert hadn't yet beaten out of him. His friendship had become one of the few bright spots in Maya's deployment, a reminder that humanity could flourish even in the darkest corners of the world. "You know what they say about quiet nights," Maya replied, allowing herself a small smile. "The moment you acknowledge them, all hell breaks loose." She continued her inventory, muscle memory guiding her hands while her mind wandered to the letter she'd received from her sister that morning. Elena was getting married next spring, and Maya had promised to be the maid of honor. The thought of wearing a dress and pretending everything was normal felt as foreign as the landscape outside these walls. The medical bay at FOB Blackwater was Maya's domain, a sterile sanctuary where rank mattered less than skill and where she had saved more lives than she cared to count. The walls bore the invisible stains of countless emergencies. The 19-year-old private who'd stepped on an IED during his first patrol, the seasoned sergeant who'd taken shrapnel to protect his squad, the Afghan interpreter whose loyalty had cost him 3 fingers and nearly his life. Each case had left its mark on Maya's soul, adding weight to the burden she carried with stoic grace. "Doc Chen, you ever think about what you'll do when you get back to the world?" Martinez asked, using the affectionate nickname the soldiers had given her despite her enlisted status. He was organizing medical supplies with the meticulous care she'd taught him, his movements reflecting the growth he'd shown over their 8-month deployment. Maya paused, considering the question that haunted her quiet moments. Home felt like a concept rather than a place. Her apartment in Colorado Springs, her job at the civilian hospital, her old life where the most dangerous thing she encountered was a difficult 4-stick. "Honestly, Jake, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything other than this." She gestured to the medical bay around them, her voice carrying a weight that belied her years. The truth was more complex than she could articulate. Before her deployment, Maya had been restless, feeling like she was operating at half capacity in her civilian role. The Army had given her purpose, but it had also revealed capabilities she'd never known she possessed. Her medical training was just one layer of her skill set. Beneath the surface lay something harder, sharper, forged in places she couldn't discuss even with those closest to her. "My grandfather was career military," Martinez offered, settling into one of the plastic chairs that furnished their break area. "He used to say that some people are born for the fight, and others find it when they need it most. Says he could always tell the difference." His young face grew serious, the weight of their shared experiences aging him beyond his years. Maya's thoughts drifted to her own grandfather, a Marine who'd served in Vietnam and never spoke about what he'd seen. He'd been the one to encourage her military service, recognizing something in her that others missed. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man," she said, though her mind was elsewhere, remembering training that went far beyond basic medical protocols. The radio crackled to life, causing both medics to freeze. "Blackwater Medical, this is Tower 1. We've got movement on the perimeter, possible incoming wounded. Stand by for further instructions." The voice belonged to Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the communications specialist, and the tension in his words was unmistakable. "Roger that, Tower 1. Medical standing by," Maya responded, her transformation instant and complete. The contemplative woman disappeared, replaced by a combat medic whose reputation had spread throughout the base. She began pulling additional supplies, her movements economical and precise. Martinez followed her lead without question, their partnership refined through months of shared crisis. As they prepared for what might come, Maya's fingers unconsciously traced the small scar on her left wrist, a memento from training she'd never officially received, in a program that didn't officially exist. The muscle memory was still there, dormant but ready, like a coiled spring waiting for the right pressure to release its energy. She'd been many things in her 28 years: daughter, sister, student, medic, soldier. But there were aspects of her identity that remained classified, buried beneath layers of secrecy and misdirection. The medical bay fell into focused silence, broken only by the hum of equipment and the distant sound of generators keeping their isolated outpost running. Maya had learned to find peace in these moments of anticipation, using them to center herself for whatever challenges lay ahead. Her training had taught her that preparation was everything, not just the physical arrangement of supplies, but the mental and emotional readiness to face whatever human suffering might walk through those doors. "Doc, can I ask you something personal?" Martinez's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Maya nodded, continuing her preparations while listening. "You're different from the other medics I've worked with. There's something, I don't know, harder about you. Not in a bad way." He added quickly, "It's just that sometimes you move like you've had training none of us know about." Maya's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. It wasn't the first time someone had noticed, and it wouldn't be the last. The challenge was always finding the right balance between capability and concealment, between being effective and being invisible. "We all have our secrets, Jake," she said finally. "The important thing is using whatever skills we have to do the job in front of us." The young corporal seemed satisfied with her non-answer, or perhaps he understood that some doors weren't meant to be opened. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside, heavy boots moving with authority and purpose. Maya's posture shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible change that spoke to instincts honed through experiences she couldn't name. Colonel James Richter appeared in the doorway, his imposing frame filling the space with an authority that seemed to demand attention. At 53, he was career military through and through, with silver hair cropped to regulation standards and pale blue eyes that missed nothing. His chest bore the ribbons and decorations of a man who'd spent 3 decades climbing the ladder of military hierarchy, each promotion earned through a combination of competence, connections, and careful political maneuvering. "Staff Sergeant Chen," he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that came naturally to men accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I need to speak with you about the medical supplies inventory. There seems to be a discrepancy in the morphine counts that requires immediate attention." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach, though her expression remained professionally neutral. The morphine inventory had been perfect. She'd checked it herself 3 times. But questioning a colonel's statement wasn't just inadvisable. It could be career-ending. "Of course, sir. Corporal Martinez, would you mind checking on the equipment maintenance logs?" Martinez glanced between Maya and the colonel, some instinct warning him that the atmosphere had shifted. Yes, Doc, I'll be in the equipment bay if you need me. He gathered his supplies and left, though Maya noticed the reluctance in his movements. Good soldiers developed survival instincts, and Jakes were telling him that something wasn't right. As the door closed behind Martinez, Maya found herself alone with Colonel Richter in the sterile confines of the medical bay. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, casting sharp shadows that emphasized the angular lines of the colonel's face. He stepped deeper into the room, his movements deliberate and predatory in a way that made Maya's training whisper warnings. She hoped she wouldn't need to heed. "You're quite the dedicated medic, aren't you, Chun?" Richter's tone had changed, becoming more casual, more personal. "I've been watching you work and I have to say, I'm impressed." "You're quite the dedicated medic, aren't you, Chun?" Richter's tone had changed, becoming more casual, more personal. "I've been watching you work and I have to say, I'm impressed by your commitment to the job." His eyes traveled over her in a way that had nothing to do with professional evaluation and everything to do with something far more dangerous. Maya's training, all of it, official and otherwise, kicked into high gear. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed but ready, her mind cataloging exit routes and potential weapons with the speed of a computer processing data. "Thank you, sir. I take pride in maintaining the highest standards of medical care for our personnel." But even as she spoke those professional words, Maya was calculating distances, assessing threats, and preparing for possibilities she hoped would remain theoretical. The colonel's reputation preceded him. Whispered stories of inappropriate behavior, of female soldiers who'd requested transfers or simply endured in silence. Maya had heard the rumors but had never thought she'd find herself in their crosshairs. The silence stretched between them, filled with tension that had nothing to do with medical supplies or inventory discrepancies. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the metal structure of their temporary home and reminding them both how isolated they were from the outside world. In this moment, in this sterile room filled with life-saving equipment, Maya realized that her greatest challenge might not come from enemy fire or roadside bombs. As Colonel Richter took another step closer, Maya's hand unconsciously moved to adjust her utility belt, fingers brushing against tools that could serve purposes their manufacturers never intended. 28 years of life had taught her many lessons, but perhaps none more important than this. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who wore the same uniform you did. Maya's daily routine at Forward Operating Base Blackwater had become a carefully orchestrated dance of efficiency and vigilance. She woke each morning at 0530, 15 minutes before reveille, using those precious moments of solitude to center herself through meditation techniques that weren't taught in any Army manual. The practice had become essential during her deployment, a way to maintain the mental clarity that kept her effective in crisis situations, while hiding the deeper complexities of her training and background. Her mornings began with inventory, not just of medical supplies, but of her own emotional and physical state. Maya had learned early in her military career that self-assessment was crucial for anyone carrying the weight of others' lives. She would stand before the small mirror in the women's latrine, studying her reflection not from vanity, but from necessity. Were her hands steady? Were her eyes clear? Was there anything in her demeanor that might compromise her effectiveness or, more importantly, reveal capabilities she needed to keep hidden? The contradiction at the heart of Maya's existence was one she navigated with careful precision. To her fellow soldiers, she was Staff Sergeant Chen, a skilled medic, a reliable teammate, someone you could count on when the bullets started flying. They saw her competence with medical procedures, her calm under pressure, her ability to make life-or-death decisions without hesitation. What they didn't see were the other skills she carried, the training that had been erased from official records, the capabilities that made her far more than just another combat medic. "Morning, Doc." Private First Class Sarah Kim's cheerful voice. always managed to cut through Maya's contemplative mornings. At 19, Kim represented everything Maya hoped to protect: youth, optimism, and an unshakable belief that good would ultimately triumph over evil. The young soldier had appointed herself Maya's unofficial morning companion, a role Maya had initially resisted but eventually came to appreciate. "Morning, Kim. How's the ankle feeling?" Maya asked, referring to the minor injury she'd treated the previous week. Her bedside manner was one of professional concern mixed with genuine caring, combination that had earned her the trust and loyalty of the soldiers under her medical care. "Good as new, thanks to you," Kim replied, falling into step beside Maya as they headed toward the mess hall. "You know, my mom always said I'd know I was in good hands when I found a medic who cared more about healing than glory. She'd like you, I think." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever soldiers talked about home, about families who worried and waited for their safe return. She'd learned to compartmentalize these emotions, to use them as fuel for her dedication, rather than allow them to compromise her judgment. "Your mom sounds like a smart woman," Maya said, her voice carrying warmth she rarely allowed herself to express. The mess hall at Forward Blackwater was a study in organized chaos, filled with soldiers from different units sharing the same cramped space and questionable food. Maya usually ate quickly and efficiently, treating meals as fuel rather than social occasions. But Kim's presence had gradually softened this routine, introducing conversations about family, dreams, and the lives they'd left behind in pursuit of something larger than themselves. "Doc Chen, you ever think about having kids?" Kim asked around a bite of what the Army generously called scrambled eggs. It was the kind of personal question that would have made Maya uncomfortable just months ago. But her young companion had a way of asking difficult questions with such genuine curiosity that deflection seemed unnecessarily cruel. Maya paused, considering both the question and how much of herself she was willing to reveal. The truth was complicated. Her training and the classified nature of her background made traditional relationships challenging, if not impossible. "How did you explain to a potential partner that large portions of your life were redacted? How did you build a family when your own identity was fractured across multiple levels of security clearance?" "I think about it sometimes," Maya said finally. "But this life doesn't exactly lend itself to stability, does it?" She gestured around the mess hall, encompassing not just their physical surroundings, but the entire reality of military service. "In a combat zone. What about you? What's waiting for you back home?" Kim's face lit up with the kind of unguarded joy that Maya envied. "My boyfriend Jake, not Martinez. Different Jake, proposed right before I deployed. We're planning a summer wedding when I get back. He wanted to wait until I was home safe before we started making real plans." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through pictures with the enthusiasm of young love. Maya studied the photos Kim showed her, a young couple at various stages of their relationship, faces bright with hope and possibility. There was something almost painful about such uncomplicated happiness, a reminder of paths not taken and choices that couldn't be unmade. "He looks like a good man," Maya said, and meant it. "He is. He worries about me being over here, but he understands why I needed to serve. Says it's one of the things he loves about me, that I can't just stand by when there's work to be done." Kim's voice carried the pride of someone whose choices were supported by the people who mattered most. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Corporal Martinez, who slid into the seat beside them with his characteristic grin. "Ladies, what's the topic of discussion this fine morning?" His presence shifted the dynamic, introducing the easy camaraderie that had developed between the three medics over months of shared challenges. "Kim was telling me about her wedding plans," Maya said, grateful for the interruption. Personal conversations had a way of revealing more than she intended, and she'd learned to navigate them carefully. "Ah, the famous Jake back home," Martinez sighed, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. Here's to love surviving deployment, time zones, and military food. His humor was gentle, lacking the edge that often characterized soldier banter about relationships and the difficulties of maintaining them across distance and danger. Maya watched the interaction between her two subordinates colleagues, really, since rank mattered less in their small medical unit than competence and trust. They represented the best of what military service could offer: dedicated professionals who'd found family in unexpected places, who'd learned to balance individual identity with collective mission. They reminded her why her own sacrifices mattered, even when those sacrifices remained invisible to the people they protected. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the mess hall. Colonel Richter had entered, his presence immediately commanding attention from the assembled soldiers. Maya felt her posture shift involuntarily, muscle memory from the previous night's encounter triggering response patterns she'd hoped to keep dormant. The colonel's eyes swept the room with practiced authority before settling on her table with unmistakable intent. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Richter called across the mess hall, his voice carrying easily over the morning conversations. "When you have a moment, I need to discuss the medical readiness report with you." The request sounded routine, professional, but Maya caught the undertone that suggested this wouldn't be a simple administrative meeting. "Of course, sir. I'll be right there," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the warning bells chiming in. Her head, she turned to Kim and Martinez, who were watching the exchange with expressions of polite interest. "Finish up here and start the morning equipment checks. I'll catch up with you shortly." As she rose from the table, Maya felt the familiar mental shift that came with transitioning from casual conversation to potential threat assessment. Her training, all of it whispered observations and calculations, exit routes, improvised weapons, defensive positions. It was a mental habit she'd developed during her classified service, one that had kept her alive in situations that officially didn't exist. "Doc, everything okay?" Martinez asked quietly, his question pitched low enough that only she could hear it. His instincts were sharp for someone so young, honed by months of combat deployment and partnership with Maya. "Everything's fine, Jake. Just routine administrative stuff," Maya said, managing a smile that was meant to be reassuring. But as she walked across the mess hall toward Colonel Richter, she wondered if routine was something that would ever again apply to her. Interactions with the base's commanding officer. The morning sun was beginning to penetrate the small windows of the mess hall, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Maya moved through those shadows with practiced grace, her stride confident but not challenging, professional but not submissive. She'd learned to walk the fine line between capability and invisibility, between competence and threat. It was a skill that served her well in the military hierarchy, where being too good at your job could be as dangerous as being too poor at it. As she approached Colonel Richter, Maya prepared herself for another performance, the role of dedicated medic, interacting with superior officer. It was a part she'd played successfully throughout her career, one that allowed her to serve effectively while keeping her deeper capabilities safely hidden. But something in the colonel's expression suggested that this particular performance might be more challenging than usual. The mess hall continued its morning rhythm, around them soldiers eating, joking, preparing for another day in a hostile environment. But Maya felt isolated from that normalcy, caught instead in a bubble of tension that existed only between her and the man who held significant power over her military career. As she drew closer to Colonel Richter, she wondered if her carefully constructed identity was about to face its most serious test yet. Outside, the desert wind was picking up again, rattling the windows and reminding everyone present how far they were from home, from help, from the comfortable illusions of safety and civilization. Maya had grown accustomed to the sound. It had become the soundtrack to her deployment, a constant reminder that they existed in a space between worlds, where different rules applied and survival depended on adaptability. "Sir, you wanted to Discuss the medical readiness report. Maya's voice was professional, neutral, giving nothing away while preparing for everything. Colonel Richter's smile never reached his eyes as he guided Maya toward a small office adjacent to the mess hall, space typically used for administrative meetings and personnel evaluations. The room smelled of stale coffee and contained the institutional furniture that populated military facilities worldwide: a metal desk, 2 uncomfortable chairs, and filing cabinets that had seen better decades. Maya entered first, her training, automatically cataloging the room's layout, potential weapons, and escape routes while maintaining the outward appearance of a subordinate following orders. "Have a seat, Staff Sergeant," Richter said, closing the door behind them with a deliberate click that seemed to echo in the small space. "I've been reviewing your performance records, and I must say, you've made quite an impression during your deployment here." He moved around to the far side of the desk but didn't sit, instead leaning against it in a casual pose that nonetheless managed to block Maya's most direct path to the door. Maya remained standing, her posture respectful but alert. "Thank you, sir. I believe in giving my best effort to the mission and to the soldiers under my medical care." Her hands hung naturally at her sides, appearing relaxed while maintaining readiness to move in any direction required. "Your best effort," Richter repeated, his tone shifting to something more personal, more predatory. "Yes, I've noticed how dedicated you are. Working late hours, always available when needed. That kind of commitment deserves recognition, don't you think?" His eyes traveled over her with an intensity that had nothing to do with professional evaluation. The temperature in the room seemed to rise despite the early morning hour. Maya felt sweat begin to form at the base of her neck while her breathing remained controlled and steady. Every instinct she possessed was screaming danger, but she remained locked in the role of professional soldier, bound by military protocol and chain of command. "I appreciate the recognition, sir. I'm just doing my job." "Just doing your job," Richter mused, stepping closer around the edge of the desk. "I wonder if you realize how valuable that makes you. How special." His hand moved as if to touch her shoulder, and Maya felt every muscle in her body tense like a coiled spring. The training that officially didn't exist kicked into high gear. Maya's mind began processing threat levels and response options with computer-like speed. Distance to target, 3 feet. Potential weapons within reach, letter opener on desk, coffee mug, various office supplies. Exit routes, door behind Richter, no windows, no alternate egress. Time to incapacitate and reach door, estimated 4 seconds. Risk assessment, high probability of career termination, potential criminal charges, possible mission compromise. But beneath those calculations ran a deeper current of anger, not just at Richter, but at a system that put her in this position, that forced her to choose between her safety and her career, that made her greatest capabilities a liability rather than an asset. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been trained to neutralize threats far more dangerous than a career officer with boundary issues, but military protocol demanded she endure rather than eliminate. "Sir, I believe we should return to discussing the medical readiness report," Maya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She took a small step backward, maintaining respectful distance while positioning herself for defensive action if it became necessary. Richter's smile grew wider, interpreting her retreat as vulnerability rather than tactical positioning. "Of course we should. But first, I think we should discuss how a dedicated soldier like yourself might advance her career. There are opportunities for someone with your attributes." His hand dropped to his side, but his body language remained aggressively casual, projecting the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. The subtext was crystal clear, and Maya felt the familiar rage that had gotten her into trouble during her earlier classified training. She'd been taught to channel that anger, to use it as fuel for precisely controlled violence. But here, in this sterile office, wearing the uniform that should have protected her from exactly this kind of predation, that training became a burden rather than an asset. "I appreciate your interest in my career advancement, sir," Maya said, carefully, "but I believe merit and performance should be the primary factors in any professional consideration." Each word was chosen with surgical precision, professional enough to avoid insubordination, while clear enough to establish boundaries. Richter pushed off from the desk, closing the distance between them to less than 2 feet. Maya could smell his aftershave, could see the calculating intelligence in his pale blue eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her training screamed at her to strike a quick palm heel to the nose, followed by a knee to the solar plexus, and the threat would be neutralized permanently. Instead, she held her position, every muscle quivering with restrained potential. "Merit and performance," he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I like that. But sometimes, Staff Sergeant, exceptional performance requires exceptional commitment." His hand rose toward her face, fingers extended to trace her cheek in a gesture that would cross every line of appropriate, professional conduct. Maya's body reacted before her mind could fully process the decision. Her hand shot up, catching Richter's wrist in a grip that stopped his motion instantly. The move was precise, controlled, applying just enough pressure to communicate capability without causing damage. For a moment, they stood frozen in tableau. The Colonel's hand trapped mere inches from Maya's face, both of them suddenly aware that the power dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. "I said no, sir." Maya's voice carried a new quality, something harder and more dangerous than anything Colonel Richter had expected from a combat medic. Her grip on his wrist was like steel, immovable, and precisely calibrated. The carefully constructed facade of helpless subordinate had cracked, revealing something underneath that made the Colonel's survival instincts finally kick into overdrive. Richter's face flushed red as he tried to pull his hand free, only to discover that Maya's grip was absolutely immovable. "Staff Sergeant, you are way out of line," he said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Release me immediately." Instead of complying, Maya applied a subtle increase in pressure, causing Richter to wince. Her brown eyes, which had seemed so professionally neutral just moments before, now held something that made the Colonel truly afraid for the first time in years. "With respect, sir, you were out of line the moment you closed that door." Her voice remained quiet, controlled, but carried an unmistakable threat. The office fell silent except for the sound of their breathing and the distant noise of the mess hall continuing its morning routine just beyond the walls. Maya realized she had reached a point of no return. Her response had revealed capabilities that couldn't be easily explained or dismissed. Colonel Richter now knew she was far more than just another combat medic, and that knowledge made him dangerous in ways that went beyond personal assault. "You're making a serious mistake, Chun," Richter said, still trying to free his wrist from her grip. "I could have you court-martialed for assaulting a superior officer." But his threat lacked conviction, undermined by the growing realization that he might have seriously misjudged the situation. Maya allowed herself a small, cold smile. "You could try, sir. But that would require explaining why you brought a subordinate into a private room and attempted to touch her without consent. It would require depositions from other soldiers who might have witnessed your behavior patterns. It would require an investigation that might uncover all sorts of interesting information." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Are you sure that's the path you want to take?" The Colonel's face went through several shades of red before settling on a pale approximation of his normal color. Maya could see him recalculating, reassessing both the situation and her role in it. She released his wrist with a controlled motion that somehow managed to be both professional and threatening. "I think we understand each other now, sir," Maya said, straightening her uniform with precise movements. If you'll excuse me, I have medical duties to attend to." She moved toward the door with fluid grace, every step demonstrating the controlled power that had been hiding beneath her professional exterior. As her hand touched the door handle, Richter's voice stopped her. "This isn't over, Staff Sergeant Chen. You've made an enemy today, and I promise you'll regret it." The threat was delivered with all the authority of his rank and position, but Maya detected the underlying uncertainty of a man who had suddenly realized he was playing a game with unknown rules. Maya turned back to face him, her expression now completely professional, as if the previous confrontation had never occurred. "I hope not, sir. I truly hope not." But her eyes told a different story, carrying a message that was unmistakably clear. She was prepared for whatever came next, and Colonel Richter had seriously underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. She left the office and walked back into the mess hall, where the normal rhythm of military life continued, unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred. Kim and Martinez were still at their table, finishing breakfast and discussing the day's medical schedule. Maya rejoined them with a smile that appeared genuine, slipping back into her role as dedicated medic and trusted colleague. "Everything okay, Doc?" Martinez asked, his sharp eyes noting something different in her demeanor despite her efforts to appear normal. "Just administrative stuff, like I said," Maya replied, but she could see that her explanation wasn't entirely convincing. Martinez was too observant, and their partnership too close, for her to completely hide the effects of her encounter with Richter. Over the following days, Maya noticed subtle changes in the dynamics at FOB Blackwater. Colonel Richter's behavior toward her became coldly professional, each interaction carrying an undercurrent of barely restrained hostility. She found herself subjected to unexpected inspections, additional duties, and bureaucratic obstacles that seemed designed more to harass than to serve any legitimate military purpose. The first major escalation came during a medical readiness drill. Maya was conducting routine training with her team when Richter appeared with two senior non-commissioned officers, ostensibly to observe the exercise. But his questions were pointed and critical, focusing on minor procedural variations that would normally be overlooked. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Richter said loudly enough for the entire assembled medical team to hear, "can you explain why your trauma assessment protocol deviates from standard military medical procedures?" His tone carried the implication that she was somehow deficient or insubordinate. Maya felt the eyes of her colleagues on her as she responded. "Sir, the modifications I've implemented are based on current civilian emergency medicine best practices and have proven effective in improving patient outcomes." Her answer was factually accurate and professionally delivered, but she could see Richter wasn't interested in medical efficacy. "Best practices according to whom, Staff Sergeant?" "Your job is to follow military protocols, not to improvise based on your personal preferences." Richter's voice carried the authority of command, but Maya detected the satisfaction of someone who believed he was successfully undermining her credibility. "According to the American College of Emergency Physicians and the International Association of Fire Chiefs, sir," Maya replied without hesitation. "I can provide you with the relevant documentation if you'd like to review the studies that support these modifications." Her response was calm, professional, and completely factual, but she could see it only increased Richter's frustration. The confrontation continued for several more minutes, with Richter finding fault with equipment placement, supply organization, and training methodologies that had previously been commended by other senior officers. Maya responded to each criticism with documented facts and reasoned explanations, maintaining her professional demeanor while making it clear that her medical decisions were based on sound, clinical judgment rather than arbitrary preference. Kim and Martinez watched the exchange with growing discomfort, recognizing that something personal was driving the colonel's unprecedented criticism of their respected medical leader. Other soldiers began to take notice as well, creating an audience for what was clearly more than a routine inspection. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. Sir, Maya suggested, recognizing that the public nature of the confrontation was serving no one's interests. Perhaps you should remember your place, Staff Sergeant, Richter replied, his mask of professional authority slipping enough to reveal the personal animosity underneath. Your job is to answer questions when they're asked, not to dictate the terms of military inspections. Maya felt the familiar surge of controlled anger, but her training held firm. She stood at attention, maintaining eye contact without challenge, her posture correct and respectful. But everyone present could sense the tension crackling between the two senior military personnel, and the uncomfortable silence stretched until Martinez finally cleared his throat. Sir, if I may, Martinez interjected carefully, Staff Sergeant. Chen's medical protocols have been consistently effective throughout our deployment. Our casualty survival rates are among the highest in theater. His defense of Maya was quiet but firm, and Maya felt a surge of gratitude for his courage in speaking up. Richter's attention shifted to Martinez with laser focus. Corporal, did I ask for your input on this matter? His voice carried a dangerous edge that suggested Martinez had just made himself a target as well. No, sir, but I thought the relevant statistics might be helpful for your evaluation, Martinez replied, maintaining his respectful tone despite the obvious threat in the colonel's demeanor. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Major Patricia Williams, the base's executive officer, who appeared in the medical bay doorway with her characteristic efficiency. Williams was a career officer with a reputation for fairness and competence, respected by both enlisted personnel and fellow officers. Colonel Richter, I apologize for the interruption, but you're needed in the communications center for an urgent briefing, Williams said. Her tone professionally neutral, but her eyes taking in the tense tableau before her. Richter's jaw tightened with frustration at the interruption, but he couldn't ignore a summons from the communications center. We'll continue this discussion later, Staff Sergeant Chen. I expect a full report on your medical protocols by 0800 tomorrow. He left with Williams, but not before delivering a look that promised future consequences. As soon as the senior officers departed, the medical bay erupted in quiet conversations and concerned whispers. Maya's team gathered around her, their faces showing a mixture of confusion, concern, and loyalty. Doc, what the hell was that about? Martinez asked, his voice carrying the frustration of someone watching a respected leader being unfairly targeted. Maya looked around at the faces of soldiers who had come to trust her medical expertise and leadership. These were people who had seen her in action during emergencies, who had witnessed her skill and dedication firsthand. Their support meant everything to her, but it also made her more vulnerable to Richter's retaliation. I honestly don't know, Jake, Maya said, though she knew exactly what was driving the colonel's behavior. Sometimes personality conflicts develop in close quarters like this. The important thing is that we continue to provide the best possible medical care for everyone on this base. Private Kim stepped forward, her young face showing unusual determination. Doc, we've all seen your work. We know how good you are at your job. If anyone tries to say different, they'll have to go through all of us. Her words were echoed by murmurs of agreement from the assembled medical team. Maya felt a tightness in her throat that had nothing to do with physical stress. These soldiers, young, idealistic, dedicated, were offering to put their own careers on the line to defend her. It was both humbling and terrifying, because she knew exactly how dangerous Colonel Richter could be when his authority was challenged. I appreciate the support, all of you, Maya said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. But the most important thing any of us can do is focus on our mission. We're here to save lives and support each other. Don't let anyone distract you from that. She managed a smile that was meant to be reassuring, though her mind was already calculating the various ways Richter might escalate his campaign against her. The harassment continued in smaller, more subtle ways over the following weeks. Maya's Duty assignments were suddenly modified to include additional administrative tasks that kept her away from hands-on medical work. Her requests for equipment upgrades were delayed or denied without explanation. Her leave requests were subjected to unusual scrutiny, requiring additional justifications that weren't demanded of other personnel at her level. Most insidiously, Richter began to question her medical decisions after the fact, demanding detailed explanations for treatment choices that had been successful and appropriate. It was a form of professional gaslighting designed to undermine her confidence and create doubt among her colleagues about her competence. The breaking point came during a mass casualty event, the kind of crisis that stripped away all pretense and revealed people's true priorities. A roadside bomb had struck a convoy returning from a humanitarian mission, resulting in multiple casualties with varying degrees of injury. Maya's medical team sprang into action with the precision and efficiency that had been drilled into them. Through months of training and experience, Maya was working on a soldier with severe abdominal trauma when Colonel Richter entered the medical bay. Instead of staying out of the way, as protocol demanded during medical emergencies, he positioned himself where he could observe and criticize Maya's work. "Staff Sergeant Chen, are you sure that's the appropriate blood pressure medication for a patient with suspected internal bleeding?" Richter's voice cut through the controlled chaos of the medical bay, causing several team members to look up in confusion. Maya didn't pause in her work, her hands steady as she continued to stabilize her patient. "Sir, with respect, this isn't the appropriate time for training discussions. I need to focus on keeping this soldier alive." Her voice was calm but firm, making it clear that she wouldn't be distracted from her life-saving work. "I think I'm qualified to determine what's appropriate in my command, Staff Sergeant," Richter replied, stepping closer to the treatment table. "I'm asking you a direct question about your medical procedures." Martinez looked up from the patient he was treating, his face showing disbelief at the colonel's timing. Other medics began to slow their work, distracted by the unprecedented interruption of emergency medical care by senior command staff. Maya felt the familiar surge of controlled anger, but this time it was mixed with something more dangerous, protective. Fury for the wounded soldier whose life hung in the balance, and for the medical team, whose effectiveness was being compromised by Richter's personal vendetta. "Colonel, the medication I've administered is epinephrine, which is standard protocol for traumatic shock," Maya said, her voice carrying a new edge. "The patient's blood pressure has stabilized, his breathing has improved, and his color is returning to normal. If you have concerns about my medical procedures, I suggest you address them after we've finished saving lives." The medical bay fell silent except for the sounds of medical equipment and the shallow breathing of wounded soldiers. Every person present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Direct confrontation between enlisted medical personnel and senior command staff during an active emergency situation. Richter's face flushed red with rage at being challenged so directly, particularly in front of subordinates. "Staff Sergeant Chen, you are relieved of duty. Step away from that patient immediately." His voice carried the full authority of command, but Maya could see uncertainty in his eyes as he realized the implications of his order. Maya looked down at the soldier she was treating, a 19-year-old private whose life she held literally in her hands. Then she looked at Colonel Richter, seeing not just personal animosity, but a willingness to sacrifice a soldier's life to serve his wounded ego. In that moment, she made a choice that would define everything that followed. "No, sir," Maya said quietly. "I will not abandon a critical patient to satisfy your personal grievances. You can court-martial me after I've finished keeping this soldier alive." She turned back to her patient, her hands continuing their life-saving work with absolute steadiness. The silence that followed was deafening. In 28 years of life and over a decade of military service, Maya had never directly disobeyed a superior officer. But she had also never been in a situation where obeying orders would directly result in preventable death. Security! Richter shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of the medical bay. I want this soldier removed from the medical bay immediately, but no security personnel appeared. Maya realized that either they were occupied with other emergency duties, or they had enough sense not to interfere with life-saving medical work. The wounded soldiers continued to receive treatment from Maya's team, who had made their choice to follow their medical leader rather than their commanding. Officer Major Williams appeared in the doorway, having been summoned by the commotion. She took in the scene: quickly wounded soldiers receiving treatment, medical personnel working efficiently, and Colonel Richter standing red-faced in the middle of it all. "Colonel, what's the situation here?" Williams asked, her voice carefully. "Neutral. Staff Sergeant Chen has directly disobeyed my order to step away from medical duties," Richter said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I want her arrested immediately for insubordination and dereliction of duty." Williams looked at Maya, who was now successfully stabilizing her patient while maintaining her position of defiance. "Staff Sergeant, is your patient stable?" "Yes. MAAM. Critical but stable. He'll need medical evacuation within the next 4 hours, but he should survive," Maya replied, her voice professional despite the extraordinary circumstances. Williams nodded and turned back to Richter. "Sir, perhaps we should discuss this outside while the medical team finishes treating the wounded." Her tone suggested this was less a request than a firm direction from the base's executive officer. As Williams led Richter from the medical bay, Maya felt the weight of what she had just done settling on her shoulders. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, made an enemy of a superior officer who now had legitimate grounds for serious disciplinary action. But as she looked around at the wounded soldiers her team was successfully treating, she knew she had made the only choice her conscience could accept. "Doc," Martinez said quietly, approaching her workstation, "that was the most badass thing I've ever seen. But you know he's going to crucify you for this, right?" Maya managed a tired smile as she completed her patient's treatment. "Maybe, Jake. But sometimes you have to decide what's more important, your career or your soul." She paused, looking around the medical bay at the soldiers they had saved. "Besides, I'm not as easy to crucify as he thinks." The words carried a weight that Martinez didn't fully understand, but he could hear the steel beneath them. Whatever Colonel Richter thought he knew about Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, Martinez suspected he was about to discover that his assumptions were dangerously incomplete. As the medical emergency wound down and the wounded soldiers were stabilized for evacuation, Maya began to prepare for the consequences of her defiance. She had revealed more of herself than she had intended, shown capabilities and resolve that would raise questions she couldn't answer honestly. But she had also drawn a line in the sand, establishing that there were limits to what she would endure. In the name of military protocol, the sun was setting over Forward Blackwater, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Maya of home, of a world beyond concrete walls and military hierarchy. Soon she would face the full weight of Colonel Richter's retribution. But for now she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction in knowing that every soldier under her care would be going home, alive because she had been willing to risk everything for what was right. Major Patricia Williams found Maya in the small chapel at FOB Blackwater, 3 hours after the medical emergency had ended. The non-denominational space was one of the few places on the base that offered genuine solitude, furnished with simple wooden benches and a single cross that managed to provide comfort without favoring any particular faith tradition. Maya sat in the back row, still in her blood-stained medical uniform, staring at the small stained glass window that caught the last rays of desert sunlight. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Williams said quietly, settling into the bench beside her. At 42, the major carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned respect through competence rather than politics. Her presence was neither threatening nor reassuring, simply professional, which Maya found oddly comforting. "Ma'am," Maya replied, not moving from her contemplative position. She had been expecting this conversation, had been preparing for it, since the moment she chose to defy Colonel Richter's direct order. The question was whether Williams was here as an ally, an enemy, or simply as a representative of military justice. "That was quite a performance in the medical bay today," Williams said, her tone giving nothing away. "Directly disobeying the superior officer's order during a combat situation. That's serious business, Chen." Maya finally turned to look at the major, seeing intelligence and careful evaluation in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I understand the gravity of my actions." Her voice carried no apology, no regret, just acknowledgement of the reality they both faced. "Do you?" Williams asked, studying Maya's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Because I've been reviewing your service record, and there are some interesting gaps that raise questions about who you really are." Maya felt her pulse quicken, though her expression remained neutral. Her official service record was carefully constructed to hide the classified training that had shaped her into something far more dangerous than a typical combat medic. "I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am." Williams pulled out a tablet and scrolled through several screens of data. 17 months of unexplained assignment to Special Operations Command. Medical training that somehow included advanced trauma procedures typically reserved for military surgeons. Physical fitness scores that suggest capabilities well beyond standard Army requirements. She paused, looking directly at Maya. "And a psychological profile that mentions additional training considerations, without any explanation of what those considerations might be." The chapel fell silent except for the distant sounds of base operations continuing their evening routine. Maya realized she was at another crossroads. She could maintain her cover story and hope Williams lacked the clearance to dig deeper. Or she could trust that the Major's intervention in the medical bay suggested sympathies that might work in her favor. "Ma'am, some aspects of military service are classified above my pay grade to discuss," Maya said carefully. "I'm sure you understand the constraints that classification requirements place on personnel records." Williams smiled for the first time since entering the chapel. "Actually, Staff Sergeant, I have a confession to make. I've spent the last 3 hours on secure communications with some very interesting people at the Pentagon. It seems your service record is more complex than either of us initially realized." Maya's training kicked into overdrive, analyzing Williams' words for threat indicators while maintaining her outward composure. The involvement of Pentagon personnel could mean exposure, court-martial, or worse, or it could mean something entirely different. "I spoke with a Colonel Sarah Martinez, no relation to your Corporal Martinez, who works in a department that officially doesn't exist," Williams continued. "She had some fascinating things to say about your background and your qualifications." The Major's tone had shifted, carrying a new note of respect that suggested the conversation was moving in an unexpected direction. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with the possibility of exposure. Colonel Sarah Martinez was her former handler, the officer who had overseen her training and deployment in operations that remained classified at the highest levels. If Martinez was talking to Williams, it meant decisions were being made above both their pay grades. "Colonel Martinez sends her regards, by the way," Williams said, watching Maya's reaction carefully. "She also wanted me to tell you that your performance today reminded her why you were selected for special training in the first place. Apparently, your willingness to defy authority when the situation demands it was considered a feature, not a bug." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Her entire identity at Forward Blackwater, carefully constructed to hide her true capabilities, was unraveling in real time. But Williams' tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a catastrophe, it might be an opportunity. "Ma'am, I'm not sure how to respond to that," Maya said honestly. My orders have always been to maintain operational security regarding any special training or capabilities. Williams nodded approvingly. And you've done an excellent job of that. So good, in fact, that Colonel Richter had no idea who he was really dealing with when he decided to make you his personal target. She closed the tablet and turned to face Maya directly. The question now is what we do with the situation he's created. Maya felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. Are you saying my actions today won't result in court-martial proceedings? I'm saying your actions today revealed that we have a much bigger problem than one medic's insubordination, Williams replied. Colonel Richter's behavior toward you has been completely inappropriate, and his interference with medical operations during a crisis situation represents a serious breach of command authority. The Pentagon is very interested in how we resolve this situation. Relief washed over Maya, but she remained cautious. Military politics could shift rapidly, and she had learned not to trust apparent victories until they were completely confirmed. What does that mean for my position here? Williams stood up, her movement suggesting the informal conversation was transitioning to something more official. It means, Staff Sergeant Chen, that you're about to receive some very interesting new orders. Orders that will allow you to use capabilities you've been hiding while addressing the command climate problems that Richter has created. As they prepared to leave the chapel, Maya realized that her carefully constructed identity was about to change dramatically. The medic who had spent months hiding her true abilities was about to step into a role that would require her to reveal exactly who she really was. The next morning brought a formation that would be remembered at Forward Blackwater for years to come. Colonel Richter stood before the assembled personnel, his face a mask of barely controlled fury as Major Williams read a series of orders that had arrived via secure communication overnight. By order of the Department of the Army, Colonel James Richter is hereby relieved of command of Forward Operating Base Blackwater. Effective immediately, Williams announced, her voice carrying across the formation with crystal clarity. Major Williams will assume temporary command pending the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Thompson. Maya stood in the formation with her medical team, watching as Richter's career imploded in real time. The charges were serious conduct, unbecoming an officer, interference with medical operations, and creating a hostile command environment. But she knew these official charges barely scratched the surface of his actual crimes. Furthermore, Williams continued, Staff Sergeant Maya Chen is hereby promoted to the rank of Sergeant First Class and assigned as the senior medical non-commissioned officer for this command, with expanded authority over all medical operations and training. The promotion announcement sent ripples of surprise and approval through the formation. Maya felt Martinez squeeze her shoulder in congratulation, while Kim's face lit up with undisguised joy. But Maya's attention was focused on the implications of her new role. It would require her to step out of the shadows and operate with a level of authority that would inevitably reveal more of her true capabilities. After the formation, Williams approached Maya with a serious expression. Sergeant First Class Chen, could you join me in my office? We need to discuss your new responsibilities. Williams' office was larger than the small room where Maya had confronted Richter, furnished with the standard military furniture, but bearing personal touches that suggested a career spent in various assignments around the world. Photos showed Williams with soldiers in different uniforms and environments, documenting a service record that spanned multiple deployments and commands. Have a seat, Sergeant Chen, Williams said, settling behind her desk with a thick folder that she opened with deliberate ceremony. Now that your promotion is official, we can discuss the real reason the Pentagon is interested in your situation. Maya felt the familiar tension that came with classified discussions. Ma'am, Colonel Martinez wasn't just offering support for your actions yesterday, Williams explained. She was also assessing whether you're ready for a more challenging assignment. It seems the Army has been looking for someone with your particular combination of medical expertise and ... additional capabilities. Williams pulled out several photographs and documents, sliding them across the desk for Maya to examine. The images showed military installations, personnel files, and incident reports that painted a disturbing picture of systemic problems in various commands. Sexual assault and harassment rates in forward deployed units have reached unacceptable levels, Williams said, her voice carrying genuine anger. Traditional command structures and military justice systems aren't adequately addressing the problem. The Pentagon wants to try a different approach. Maya studied the documents, seeing patterns of behavior that mirrored her own experience with Richter. But these cases were worse: actual assaults, careers destroyed, soldiers who had been failed by the very system they had sworn to serve. They want to embed personnel with your background and capabilities in problematic commands, Williams continued. Not as investigators or military police, but as operators who can address threats that traditional military justice can't touch. The implications were staggering. Maya was being offered the chance to use her hidden training in service of protecting other soldiers from predators like Richter. It was exactly the kind of mission she had been prepared for, though she had never imagined it would involve targeting fellow American service members. What exactly would my role be? Maya asked, though. She suspected she already knew the answer. Williams leaned back in her chair, studying Maya's reaction carefully. You would continue serving as a medic, maintaining that cover identity while being positioned to identify and neutralize threats to unit cohesion and soldier welfare. When traditional command channels fail, you would be authorized to take more direct action. Maya felt a chill of understanding. She was being offered the chance to become an internal operative, targeting military personnel who abused their authority and preyed on subordinates. It was work that needed to be done, but it would require her to operate in a gray area between official military justice and something much darker. And if I decline this assignment? Maya asked. Then you return to your regular medical duties. With an exemplary service record and the gratitude of your chain of command, Williams replied. But the problems will continue, and other soldiers will suffer the consequences. Maya thought about Kim's bright optimism, Martinez's loyalty, and all the young soldiers who served with dedication and honor while being vulnerable to predators in positions of authority. She thought about the medic's oath she had taken to do no harm, and wondered if sometimes preventing harm required actions that traditional medicine couldn't address. I need time to consider this, Maya said. Williams nodded approvingly. Take all the time you need. But Sergeant Chen, Maya, this is an opportunity to serve in a way that very few people are qualified for. Your country needs what you can provide. As Maya left Williams' office, she realized that her confrontation with Colonel Richter had set in motion changes that would define the rest of her military career. She had revealed her true capabilities in defense of a principle, and now those capabilities were being recognized and redirected toward a larger mission. The desert sun was setting again over Forward Blackwater, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and red that had marked the end of her old life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to serve. But tonight, Maya allowed herself to appreciate the fact that Colonel Richter's abuse of power had been stopped, and that she had played a role in ensuring he would never again threaten another soldier. Martinez found her standing outside the medical bay, looking up at the emerging stars in the desert sky. Penny for your thoughts, Sergeant First Class Chen, he said, emphasizing her new rank with obvious pride. Maya smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Just thinking about new beginnings, Jake, and about how sometimes the best way to move forward is to stop hiding who you really are. Any regrets about what happened with Richter? Martinez asked. Maya considered the question seriously before answering. No regrets about stopping him, none at all. She paused, looking at the young medic who had shown such courage in supporting her. But I have a feeling our real work is just beginning. 6 months after Colonel Richter's removal from command, FOB Blackwater had transformed into something unrecognizable from its previous incarnation. The change wasn't visible in the physical structures, the same concrete buildings, the same razor-wire perimeter, the same harsh desert landscape that surrounded their isolated outpost. But the atmosphere had shifted fundamentally, creating an environment where soldiers could focus on their mission, rather than protecting themselves from their own leadership. Sergeant First Class Maya Chen stood in the expanded medical facility. Observing the morning briefing she now led for the enlarged medical team. The Pentagon's recognition of her capabilities had brought resources and personnel that elevated their medical operations to a level of excellence that served as a model for other forward-deployed units. But more importantly, it had created a safe space where soldiers could receive care without fear of judgment or exploitation. The new trauma protocols have reduced our evacuation time by an average of 43 minutes, reported Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, Maya's newly assigned deputy, who had arrived with impressive credentials and an understanding that there were aspects of Maya's background that remained classified. Patient survival rates continue to exceed theater averages, and soldier confidence in medical services has increased significantly, according to the latest Command Climate Survey. Maya nodded approvingly, but her attention was focused on the deeper implications of Walsh's report. The climate survey data represented more than just medical statistics. It reflected a fundamental shift in how soldiers viewed their own safety and welfare within the military structure. When soldiers trusted their medical personnel, they were more likely to report problems and seek help before situations became critical. "What about the mentorship program?" Maya asked, referring to one of her more innovative initiatives that paired experienced medical personnel with newly arrived soldiers. "Expanding beyond our initial projections," replied Corporal Martinez, now promoted to sergeant and serving as Maya's senior NCO. "We're getting requests from other units to participate, and Lieutenant Colonel Thompson has asked us to develop a standardized protocol that can be implemented across the region." Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Thompson had proven to be everything Colonel Richter was not: competent, ethical, and genuinely committed to soldier welfare. Her arrival had brought stability and professional leadership that allowed Maya's programs to flourish while maintaining the operational security required for her expanded role. The briefing concluded with updates on equipment maintenance, supply status, and training schedules, the routine administrative details that kept their medical operations running smoothly. But as the team dispersed to their daily duties, Maya reflected on how different these meetings felt compared to the tense, fearful atmosphere that had existed under Richter's command. "Sergeant Chen, could I speak with you privately?" Staff Sergeant Walsh's request interrupted Maya's contemplation. Walsh was an interesting addition to their team, officially assigned as a medical administrator, but carrying qualifications and security clearances that suggested she understood Maya's true role. They walked to Maya's expanded office, which now included a secure communications setup that allowed her to maintain contact with Colonel Martinez and other Pentagon personnel involved in her special assignment. The space reflected her dual identity medical textbooks and equipment, alongside encrypted communication devices and training materials that weren't available through normal Army channels. "I've been reviewing the incident reports from across the theater," Walsh said, settling into one of the chairs that faced Maya's desk. "There are patterns emerging that suggest our success here might be creating opportunities for broader implementation." Maya opened the secure folder Walsh handed her, scanning reports from multiple forward operating bases that detailed command climate problems, sexual harassment incidents, and breakdowns in military justice procedures. The scope of the problem was staggering, but what stood out were the similarities to what they had experienced with Richter. "These aren't isolated incidents," Maya observed, studying the documentation with the analytical skills her special training had developed. "There's a systemic pattern of behavior that suggests predators actively seek positions where they can exploit power imbalances. Walsh nodded gravely. The Pentagon assessment team has identified 17 commands where intervention might be necessary. But traditional military justice approaches have proven inadequate for addressing senior personnel who understand how to manipulate the system. Maya understood the implication immediately. Her success in neutralizing Richter and transforming the command climate at FOB Blackwater had proven that alternative approaches could be effective. Now she was being offered the opportunity to expand that mission to other commands where soldiers were suffering under similar conditions. What would implementation look like? Maya asked, though she suspected the answer would fundamentally change her military career. Mobile assignment to problem commands, ostensibly as medical personnel augmentation, but actually as specialized intervention capability, Walsh explained. You would have a team of carefully selected personnel with complementary skills operating under medical cover while addressing command climate issues through whatever means prove necessary. Maya felt the familiar tension between duty and personal preference. The work would be important, necessary, and aligned with her core values of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But it would also require her to operate in moral gray areas, making decisions that traditional military structure couldn't officially acknowledge or support. I need to see the specific situation reports, Maya said finally. And I need to understand the rules of engagement for this type of operation. Walsh smiled, reaching into her briefcase for additional documents. I was hoping you'd say that. Colonel Martinez has prepared a comprehensive briefing package that addresses operational parameters, support structures, and accountability measures. Over the following hours, Maya absorbed information that painted a disturbing picture of systemic problems throughout deployed military units. But it also outlined a carefully planned response that would allow her to address these problems using capabilities that traditional military justice couldn't access. The mission profiles were varied. Some commands needed direct intervention to remove predatory leadership. Others required subtle influence to strengthen existing accountability structures. Maya would be accompanied by a carefully selected team whose official specialties in medical, communications, and logistic support would mask their actual capabilities. There's one more thing, Walsh said as their briefing session concluded. Colonel Martinez wanted me to emphasize that this assignment is entirely voluntary. Your service record already demonstrates exceptional dedication and capability. No one would question a decision to continue serving in traditional medical roles. Maya walked to the window of her office, looking out at the soldiers going about their daily routines in an environment she had helped create safe, professional, focused on mission accomplishment rather than survival within their own ranks. The transformation had been possible because someone had been willing to step outside traditional boundaries and take action when official channels failed. When would this assignment begin? Maya asked. Immediately, if you accept. Your first deployment would be to Phoebe Lipu, Lightning, where a series of sexual assault incidents has created a command crisis that traditional intervention hasn't resolved. Walsh's tone was matter-of-fact, but Maya could hear the urgency underlying the professional presentation. Maya thought about Kim, who had completed her deployment and returned home to marry her Jake, sending Maya photos of their simple ceremony that radiated joy and hope. She thought about Martinez, whose growth and development under her mentorship had transformed him into a leader who would continue protecting soldiers long after she was gone. She thought about all the young soldiers who served with dedication and honor, deserving protection from those who would exploit their vulnerability. I accept, Maya said quietly. When do we leave? The transfer happened with the efficiency that characterized special operations, official orders that reassigned Maya and her team to administrative positions that would provide cover for their actual mission. The farewell at FOB Blackwater was emotional but necessarily limited. As most personnel couldn't be told the true nature of Maya's new assignment, Martinez found her in the medical bay on her last night, conducting a final inventory of supplies and equipment. "It's weird, you." "No," he said, settling into one of the chairs where they had shared so many conversations. "This place was hell when you arrived, and now it's probably the safest, most professional command in theater." Maya paused in her work, looking around the medical facility that had become both her sanctuary and her battlefield. "You made it that. Way too, Jake. You and Kim and all the others who chose to do the right thing when it mattered. What you did with Richter standing up to him in that medical bay, that changed everything," Martinez continued. "Not just here, but for everyone who heard about it. You showed us that we don't have to accept abuse just because someone outranks us." Maya felt the weight of that responsibility, understanding that her actions had rippled far beyond their immediate consequences. Soldiers throughout the theater had heard about the medic who had defied a colonel to protect her patients, and that story had given them permission to believe they could stand up for themselves and others. "The important thing is that you continue that legacy," Maya said. "Keep protecting the soldiers under your care. Keep building an environment where people can serve with dignity and safety. That's how real change happens, not through individual heroics, but through everyday choices to do what's right." Martinez nodded seriously, accepting the responsibility she was passing to him. "Where are you going? Can you tell me?" Maya smiled, appreciating his understanding that some questions couldn't be answered directly. "I'm going where I'm needed, Jake. Same as always." She paused, considering how much she could reveal. "But I promise you this, what we built here isn't ending. It's expanding." As dawn broke over Forward Blackwater, Maya and her new team departed for their first assignment. Staff Sergeant Walsh had proven to be exactly what her credentials suggested. A highly capable operative whose medical expertise masked capabilities that would prove crucial for their expanded mission. Sergeant Torres, their communications specialist, brought cyber warfare skills that could penetrate any security system. Corporal Anderson, officially assigned as their logistics coordinator, carried qualifications in psychological operations that would allow them to influence command structures without direct confrontation. The helicopter that carried them toward Forward Lightning flew low over the Afghan landscape, following routes that avoided population centers and potential threats. Maya looked down at the harsh terrain that had become familiar during her deployment, thinking about the soldiers currently serving in outposts scattered across this hostile environment. Some of those soldiers were suffering under commanders who abused their authority, exploited their subordinates, and corrupted the military values they had sworn to uphold. Traditional military justice had proven inadequate for addressing these predators, who understood how to manipulate the system and escape consequences for their actions. But Maya and her team represented a different approach, one that operated outside traditional boundaries while remaining firmly committed to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. They were medical personnel, support staff, administrative augmentation. They were also something much more dangerous to those who preyed on their subordinates. As Forward Lightning appeared on the horizon, Maya felt the familiar transformation that came with beginning a new mission. The combat medic who had spent months hiding her true capabilities was gone, replaced by someone who could use every skill she possessed in service of protecting American soldiers from their own leadership. "First time seeing lightning?" Walsh asked, studying the approaching base through binoculars. "First time as myself," Maya replied, checking her equipment with the precision that had become second nature. "But not the last." The helicopter touched down at Forward Lightning as the sun reached its zenith, beginning another chapter in Maya's mission to protect those who served with honor from those who would exploit their dedication. Colonel Richter had been neutralized, but he was just one predator in a system that had allowed too many others to operate with impunity. Maya stepped off the helicopter, carrying medical supplies and official orders that identified her as routine personnel augmentation. But her true cargo was the capability to ensure that no soldier under her protection would suffer the abuse she had witnessed and stopped at FOB Blackwater. The real work was just beginning. The Pentagon briefing room buzzed with quiet conversation as senior officers gathered for the quarterly review of the Special Medical Intervention Program, the official designation for Maya's expanded mission that had grown far beyond anyone's initial projections. Colonel Sarah Martinez, now promoted to Brigadier General, stood at the head of the conference table, reviewing classified reports that documented 3 years of systematic change across deployed military units. "Ladies and gentlemen, the results speak for themselves," General Martinez announced as the room fell silent. "Sexual assault rates in participating commands have decreased by 78%. Command climate surveys show unprecedented levels of soldier confidence in reporting procedures. Most significantly, we've identified and removed 43 senior personnel whose behavior was deemed incompatible with military leadership. The statistics represented more than bureaucratic success. They documented thousands of soldiers who had been protected from predators, careers that had been saved from destruction, and a fundamental shift in how the military addressed internal threats to unit cohesion and personnel welfare." Maya sat in the middle of the conference table, now holding the rank of Master Sergeant and serving as the program's senior field operative. Her appearance had evolved to match her expanded responsibilities, still clearly military, but carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone whose capabilities extended far beyond her official specialization. The Combat Medic's Cross remained on her uniform, but it was now accompanied by decorations that hinted at service in classified operations. "Master Sergeant Chen, could you brief us on the current operational status?" General Martinez requested, though her tone carried the warmth of a mentor addressing a protege whose success had exceeded all expectations. Maya stood, activating the secure presentation system that displayed a map of deployed military units across multiple theaters of operation. Red markers indicated commands where intervention had been completed, yellow showed operations in progress, and green represented units where preventive measures had successfully maintained healthy command climates. "We currently have 6 teams deployed across 3 theaters, with 2 additional teams in training for specialized operations," Maya reported. "The evolution from reactive intervention to proactive prevention has allowed us to address potential problems before they become command crises." The transformation of Maya's mission had been organic, driven by success that generated demand for expansion. What had begun as a response to systematic failures had evolved into a comprehensive program that combined traditional military medicine with specialized capabilities for protecting personnel from internal threats. "What's the status of the training pipeline?" asked Colonel James Sullivan, the Pentagon's liaison for Special Operations Personnel Management. His question reflected ongoing concerns about scaling the program while maintaining the operational security required for its unique mission. "We've identified candidates from medical military police and special operations backgrounds who demonstrate the psychological profile and technical capabilities required for this type of work," Maya replied. "The challenge remains balancing operational effectiveness with the need for personnel who can maintain medical cover identities." Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, now promoted to Sergeant First Class and serving as Maya's Deputy Program Manager, added details about recruitment and training protocols. "We've developed a screening process that identifies personnel with the necessary combination of medical expertise, tactical capabilities, and psychological resilience required for operations in morally complex environments." The discussion continued for 2 hours, covering operational successes, resource allocation, and strategic planning for expanded implementation. But Maya's mind wandered to the individual stories behind the statistic soldiers who had been protected, careers that had been saved, and predators who had been neutralized before they could cause irreparable harm. Maya stood in the chapel, At Fort Bragg, adjusting the collar of her dress uniform as she prepared for a ceremony that would publicly recognize achievements that had remained classified for years. The Distinguished Service Medal being awarded today represented service that couldn't be fully described in official citations, but its presentation marked a turning point in her career and the military's approach to internal threats. The audience included soldiers from multiple units where Maya's teams had operated, their presence a testament to the lasting impact of her work. Many of them didn't know the full extent of her activities, but they understood that her interventions had created safer, more professional environments where they could serve with dignity and focus on their missions. Today we recognize Master Sergeant Maya Chen for exceptional service in improving command climate and soldier welfare across multiple deployed units, announced General Patricia Williams, now serving as the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. Her innovative approaches to medical support and soldier care have set new standards for military excellence. Maya accepted the medal with the same quiet dignity that had characterized her service, knowing that the true measure of her success wasn't found in decorations, but in the lives she had protected and the culture she had helped change. The ceremony was brief, professional, and deliberately vague about specifics, maintaining the operational security that remained essential to her ongoing mission. After the ceremony, Maya found herself surrounded by soldiers whose lives had been touched by her work, though many didn't realize the full extent of her involvement in their protection. Kim Martinez, she had married her Jake and taken his name, approached with 2 young children in tow, her face beaming with the happiness of someone whose military service had been everything she had hoped it would be. Sergeant First Class Chen, Master Sergeant Chen, Kim said, correcting herself with a laugh. I can't believe how far you've come since those mornings in the mess hall at Blackwater. Maya hugged her former colleague warmly, genuinely moved by the sight of Kim's obvious happiness and success. Look at you, Sergeant First Class Martinez, mother of 2, still serving with distinction. Your mom was right about finding good people to follow. Jake Martinez, now a staff sergeant running his own medical team, joined them with the easy camaraderie that had characterized their partnership years earlier. Doc, I've been telling stories about you for years, but I always suspected there was more to them than I knew. Today kind of confirms that suspicion. Maya smiled, appreciating his continued perceptiveness while maintaining the boundaries that operational security required. The important thing is that we built something together at Blackwater that outlasted all of us. That's the real victory. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a young second lieutenant whose nervous energy suggested someone seeking a mentor. Master Sergeant Chen? I'm Lieutenant Sarah Kim, no relation to Sergeant Martinez here. Just coincidence. I've heard about your work in medical operations, and I was hoping I could ask you some questions about career development. Maya studied the young officer, seeing familiar determination mixed with the idealism that characterized the best military leaders. Of course, Lieutenant. What specifically are you interested in? I want to make sure soldiers under my command feel safe and supported, Lieutenant Kim said earnestly. I've heard stories about commands where that wasn't the case, and I want to do everything I can to prevent those problems. Maya felt the familiar surge of protectiveness that had driven her throughout her career. This young officer represented the next generation of military leadership people who understood that taking care of soldiers was both a moral imperative and a practical necessity for mission success. The most important thing you can do is listen, Maya said. Create an environment where soldiers know they can report problems without fear of retaliation. And never forget that your primary job as a leader is to protect the people under your command, even when that means challenging authority. Lieutenant Kim nodded seriously, absorbing the advice with the intensity of someone who took leadership responsibilities seriously. Is it true that you once stood up to a colonel during a medical emergency? Maya glanced at Jake Martinez, who grinned with obvious pride at the story that had become legendary throughout medical units. Sometimes you have to decide what's more important, following orders or saving lives. When those two things conflict, the choice should be obvious. The classroom at the Army Medical Training Center fell silent as Maya concluded her presentation on command climate and soldier welfare. Her audience consisted of senior medical personnel preparing for deployment, officers who would be responsible for maintaining the health and morale of soldiers serving in challenging environments. "The statistics are clear," Maya said, gesturing to the final slide of her presentation. "Commands with strong medical leadership and clear reporting procedures experience significantly lower rates of sexual assault, harassment, and other disciplinary problems. Medical personnel are uniquely positioned to identify and address these issues before they become command crises." Maya's role as a senior instructor represented a natural evolution from her operational duties, allowing her to influence military culture through education rather than direct intervention. The classified aspects of her background remained hidden, but her expertise in command climate issues had made her a sought-after expert on personnel protection and military leadership. "Master Sergeant Chen," asked a major preparing for her first deployment as a senior medical officer, "what do you do when traditional reporting channels don't work? When the problems come from senior leadership?" Maya paused, considering how to answer a question that touched on classified operations while providing useful guidance. "You document everything. You build alliances with other professional personnel. And you never forget that your ultimate loyalty is to the soldiers under your care, not to the individuals who happen to outrank you." The question and answer session continued for another 30 minutes, covering topics that ranged from administrative procedures to moral courage and leadership. Maya found these teaching opportunities deeply satisfying, knowing that her experiences, both official and classified, could help prepare the next generation of military medical leaders. After the class, Maya walked across the training center campus, reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a combat medic hiding her true capabilities to a senior leader shaping military culture through education and mentorship. The transformation had been gradual but profound, requiring her to integrate all aspects of her identity, rather than hiding crucial parts of who she was. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from General Martinez. "New situation developing. Might need your consultation on intervention planning. Are you available for travel?" Maya smiled, recognizing that her operational days weren't entirely behind her. The Special Medical Intervention Program continued to evolve, addressing new challenges as military culture adapted to changing threats and social expectations. Her expertise remained valuable, even as she had transitioned to primarily advisory and training roles. Maya stood on the stage of the Association of Military Medical Personnel's annual conference, addressing an audience of over 2,000 medical professionals from all branches of service. Her keynote speech on leadership, ethics, and medical practice in military settings represented the culmination of a career that had spanned multiple specialties while maintaining focus on protecting those who served. "The oath we take as medical professionals to do no harm sometimes requires us to act beyond traditional medical practice," Maya said, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium. "When we see harm being done to the soldiers we serve, we have a responsibility to intervene, regardless of the source of that harm." The audience included soldiers Maya had served with, protected, and trained over the course of her career. Their presence represented a living testament to the impact of her work, though most of them remained unaware of the full scope of her activities on their behalf. After her presentation, Maya was approached by a group of young medical officers, whose questions revealed a sophisticated understanding of the complex relationship between medical practice and military leadership. Their perspectives had been shaped by the cultural changes that Maya's generation had implemented, creating an environment where soldier welfare was understood as a command responsibility rather than an administrative afterthought. "Master Sergeant Chen, asked a young captain whose earnest expression reminded Maya of herself 20 years earlier. How do we balance our medical obligations with military hierarchy when those two things conflict? Maya considered the question. That had defined her entire career, remembering a moment in a small office when she had chosen to defy authority rather than abandon her principles. You remember that your medical oath supersedes any other obligation. Soldiers trust us with their lives. That trust has to be absolute, regardless of what anyone else thinks about your decisions. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering topics that ranged from practical medical procedures to complex ethical dilemmas. Maya found herself energized by the intelligence and dedication of the young officers, recognizing in them the same commitment to service that had driven her own career. As the conference concluded, Maya reflected on the transformation she had witnessed in military culture over the past decade. The systematic problems that had once required covert intervention were increasingly being addressed through official channels, though her specialized expertise remained relevant for particularly challenging situations. The retirement ceremony at Fort Sam Houston was small, professional, and attended by a carefully selected group of colleagues who understood the significance of Maya's service without knowing all the details. General Sarah Martinez, now the Army Surgeon General, presented Maya with the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest decoration for valor, awarded for classified operations that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Colonel Maya Chen has served with exceptional distinction in assignments that have fundamentally improved the welfare and safety of American soldiers, General Martinez announced to the gathered audience. Her contributions to military medicine and soldier care will influence our service for generations to come. Maya's promotion to colonel had come with her final assignment, establishing a permanent training program that would institutionalize the lessons learned from 15 years of specialized operations. The program would continue her work through official channels, training medical personnel to identify and address command climate issues before they required extraordinary intervention. After the ceremony, Maya found herself surrounded by soldiers from every stage of her career. Jake Martinez, now a sergeant major serving as the senior enlisted medical advisor for Army Special Operations Command, approached with his characteristic grin and a small wrapped package. Colonel Chen still sounds weird saying that, Jake said, embracing his former mentor and longtime friend. This is from all of us who served under you at various times and places. He handed her the package with obvious emotion. Maya unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a medic's cross crafted from battlefield metal and engraved with coordinates from FOB Blackwater, the place where her true mission had begun. Attached was a simple note, for someone who proved that the most important battles are often fought without recognition. It's perfect, Maya said, feeling tears she rarely allowed herself to shed. Thank you. Kim Martinez appeared beside her husband, now a civilian working as a trauma nurse, but maintaining the connections forged during their shared deployment. Maya, you changed everything for us. Not just at Blackwater, but everywhere you went afterward. We all knew you were special, but we never realized how special until years later. Maya looked around at the faces of soldiers whose lives had been touched by her work, some directly, others through the cultural changes she had helped implement. Their presence represented the true measure of her success, a military where soldiers could serve with dignity, where predators were identified and removed, where medical personnel were empowered to protect those under their care. You all did the real work, Maya said. I just helped create the conditions where good people could do what they knew was right. As the reception continued, Maya found herself in conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim, the same young officer who had sought her mentorship years earlier. Kim now commanded a medical battalion and had implemented programs based on principles Maya had developed during her operational years. Colonel Chen, I wanted you to know that your influence extends far beyond the soldiers you directly served, Kim said. The training programs you developed, the cultural changes you helped implement, They're protecting soldiers who will never know your name, but whose lives are better because of what you did. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal accomplishment. Her career had been built on the principle that protection sometimes required actions that couldn't be officially acknowledged. But the ultimate validation came from knowing that her work had created lasting change that would outlive her own service. Maya stood in her garden in Colorado Springs, reading a letter from the current commander of what had once been FOB Blackwater. The base had been transformed into a permanent training facility specializing in leadership development and command climate, with programs based on principles she had helped establish decades earlier. The Sergeant Maya Chen Leadership Center continues to set the standard for professional military education, the letter read. Every student who graduates from our programs carries forward the lessons you taught about moral courage, professional integrity, and the sacred responsibility of protecting those who serve. At 68, Maya had spent her retirement years consulting for military organizations, writing training materials, and occasionally providing expert testimony in cases that required her unique expertise. Her official biography credited her with innovations in military medicine and leadership development, while her classified achievements remain known only to a select few. Her home office was filled with photos from throughout her career, formal military portraits, candid shots from various deployments, and images from reunions with soldiers she had served alongside. But the photo she treasured most showed her with Jake and Kim Martinez at their daughter's commissioning ceremony, representing the continuation of military service guided by principles of integrity and protection. The doorbell interrupted her contemplation, and Maya opened it to find a young woman in army dress uniform whose bearing suggested both nervousness and determination. Colonel Chen? I'm Second Lieutenant Jessica Torres. I'm about to deploy to my first assignment as a medical platoon leader, and my mentor suggested I speak with you about leadership in challenging environments. Maya smiled, recognizing the earnest dedication that had characterized the best soldiers throughout her career. Of course, Lieutenant. Come in. Would you like some tea? As they settled in Maya's living room, surrounded by the quiet memorabilia of a lifetime of service, Lieutenant Torres pulled out a notebook filled with questions about medical operations, soldier welfare, and moral courage in leadership. I've read your published articles on command climate and medical ethics, Torres said. But I wanted to ask you personally, how do you maintain your principles when the system seems designed to compromise them? Maya paused, looking at this young officer who reminded her of herself at the beginning of her own journey. You remember that principles aren't convenient, they're essential. And you never forget that the most important person you answer to isn't your superior officer or your chain of command. It's the soldier who trusts you with their life. They talked for 3 hours, covering topics that ranged from practical medical procedures to complex ethical dilemmas. Maya found herself energized by Torres's intelligence and commitment, recognizing in her the same dedication to service that had driven her own career. As Lieutenant Torres prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Colonel Chen, one more question. I've heard stories about soldiers who stood up to authority when it was necessary to protect their people. How do you find the courage to do what's right when it might cost you everything? Maya smiled, remembering a moment in a sterile office when she had made the choice that defined her entire career. You find it by remembering that some things are more important than your own safety. And you trust that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, will ultimately serve something larger than yourself. After Torres left, Maya returned to her garden, where the Colorado sunset painted the mountains in shades that reminded her of countless evenings in deployed locations around the world. She had spent her career protecting soldiers who often never knew they needed protection, stopping threats they never realized existed, and creating changes they might never fully understand. The letter from Forward Blackwater was still in her hand, and she read it again as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Her work had become institutionalized, integrated into official military culture in ways that would protect future generations of soldiers. The battle she had fought in shadows had ultimately been won in daylight, through policy changes, training programs, and cultural evolution. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Jake Martinez, watching the news about the new Pentagon. Policies on command climate. Pretty sure your fingerprints are all over those changes. Still making the world safer, even in retirement. She smiled, appreciating the connection with old friends who understood the importance of their shared mission. Her reply was simple. The work continues, just through different people now. As the evening deepened, Maya reflected on the journey that had taken her from a young medic hiding her true capabilities to a senior leader whose influence would shape military culture for decades to come. She had learned to integrate all aspects of her identity, using every skill she possessed in service of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The medic's cross she still wore on a chain around her neck caught the last rays of sunlight, reminding her of the oath she had taken to do no harm. Sometimes that had required healing. Sometimes it had required teaching. And sometimes it had required eliminating threats that traditional military justice couldn't address. But always, it had required the courage to stand up for what was right. Regardless of the personal cost. Maya went inside as the Colorado evening settled into night, carrying with her the satisfaction of a career spent in service of something larger than herself. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to influence and protect, though through different means than she had employed during her operational years. The young Lieutenant Torres would face her own challenges and make her own choices about when principles mattered more than protocol. But she would do so in a military culture that had been shaped by people like Maya, who had been willing to sacrifice personal safety for the protection of others. In distant locations around the world, soldiers continued their service in environments made safer by changes Maya had helped implement. They might never know her name, but their ability to serve with dignity and security was part of her lasting legacy. The silence of her Colorado home was different from the silence she had learned to appreciate in deployed locations. This was the piece of a mission accomplished, of work that would continue through others, of a life spent in service of values that transcended individual ambition. Maya settled into her evening routine, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of someone who had answered the call to serve with everything she possessed. Her story had become part of a larger narrative of military evolution, cultural change, and the eternal struggle to protect those who dedicate their lives to protecting others.